I'm making an obby from scratch on Hytopia and showing you every step of the process along the way, from before the first line of code is ever written all the way through to the final published game. If you don't know me, my name is Ash, and in this second video of our 5-part tutorial series, we're covering AI coding for Hytopia. We will be using Cursor AI to help us write all of the code for our obby, and by the end of this video, we will have all of our core functionality complete. This video is sponsored by Hytopia, a modern games platform where you can create your own link-shareable, massively multiplayer online blocky games that work on any browser or device. Before going any further in this video, you're going to want to make sure you've completed all of the steps in the last video, which I will link up above and in the description. And if you've done that, then your project should already have a file structure plan, a development plan, and some rules to keep Cursor AI on track while we make an obby on Hytopia. So like I said, by the end of this video, we're going to have all of our core functionality complete, but it's still not going to look like much because today we're only going to be focused on our left brain tasks. So we're not doing any map building, no polish, nothing like that. We're purely coding. I found that when you're solo deving a game, it's really important to be disciplined in the tasks that you're doing and not context switch a lot. And what I mean by context switching is like going from coding over to map building and then back to coding and then over to sound effects. Every time you make a switch like that and your brain has to like start a new type of task, you lose a significant amount of brain processing power as you switch back and forth like that. So for today, to maximize our productivity, we are only focused on coding, and we'll leave the map building and the polish for later videos. And the way that we're going to approach coding with Cursor is to simply go step by step through that development plan that we made during our planning session. And for each step, we're going to go through the same exact process. First, we're going to prep, we're going to understand the step, we're going to modify it if necessary, and we're going to create any placeholder files. Then we're going to do our prompting. We're going to create a detailed prompt referencing any necessary files or examples. Then we're going to examine what the AI has done, and we're going to ask some questions like, does the code work? Does it accomplish our goal? Is there anything missing? Can it be simpler? Do I understand everything? If the answer to any of these questions is no, then we're going to go back to step 2 and keep prompting until we get a yes. Once we get that yes, we're going to do step 4, which is to clean up. We're going to add comments. We're going to make notes of any to-dos we need to do. And then we're going to clean up any unnecessary lines of code. And then once that is done, we are going to commit our changes to our GitHub. And I'm going to go ahead and say right now that this is not the only way to do these things. The planning that we did in the last video, that's not the only way to plan. The steps that I'm going to take in this video, that's not the only way to code using AI. This is just a starting place. And this is a system that I sort of use. I don't even always stick to it exactly either. But I feel like it's important to have some sort of foundation that you can start from. And then you can adapt it for your own style as you learn what you like to do, what you don't like to do, and so on. But for now, we're just going to follow this just to keep things simple. As I was thinking about how to structure this tutorial, I realized that there are certain steps in my development plan that are easier to demonstrate that whole methodology than others. And for some steps, it actually makes more sense just to go over what the AI creates rather than show the entire process and the prompting for all of that. So we're going to do a mix of both. To start, these first 2 steps in my development plan are basically just setup steps, and you'll probably have some similar setup steps as well. So the prompt that I used for the very first step in my plan was, let's begin working through our @development-plan.md. Let's start with phase 1, step 1. Please do not work ahead or do any tasks beyond what is listed in this step. Please reference Hytopia documentation and example games like Frontiers to ensure best practices. And I, of course, used agent mode for this since it was creating a lot of files. And my prompt for the second step was basically exactly the same. And Cursor got it basically exactly right both times. I ran the prompts, it reorganized things, it made my files, the server ran fine, everything was there that I needed. So I just cleaned up some comments, I deleted a couple things that I didn't need, and I committed the changes to GitHub. So instead of showing you that entire process for those first 2 steps, let's just talk about what it made, and then we'll go through the whole process for step 3. So looking at what it's done, you might remember that initially we had our index.ts file, and it was just the Hytopia init file, and all of our game code was in this one file. Now what we have done is we've taken out a lot of the code that was in here and split it out into separate files. So now our index file, which is still our main entry point for the game, just has a couple of things. So we're importing some stuff from Hytopia, we're importing our game manager from the game manager file that we made, we're importing our world map, and then we start the server, we have some console logs, we load our map, and then we initialize our game manager. And everything else that was in here before has been moved out to other files. So if we look at our planning folder, we have our file structure plan, right? And you can see that it's got all of these different files. So our game manager is in our core folder. So if we go to our SRC folder and we go to core, in there, we'll see that game manager file. And this game manager file does a few things. So it sets up our event handlers and it initializes our game. So if I double click this setup event handlers and I hit Control C to copy, and then I hit Control F, I can paste that into this find bar and I can look for the next time this is used. And down here, we can see exactly what's happening in that setup event handlers function. So you can see inside of here, it's setting up what happens when a player joins the world. Remember, this used to be in the index file and now it's been moved into this file. So when a player joins the world, we create the player entity, we spawn the player, we load the UI, and then we send welcome messages. And then if we want to do the same thing, I can double click the send welcome messages. I can paste it up here into the find bar, and then it'll bring us down to where those welcome messages actually are. So this game manager right now is just setting up a few things when the server starts. And the most important thing obviously being creating our player entity and spawning it into the world. And now our logic for creating the game player, instead of being in the index file like it used to be, it's now in its own game player entity file, which we also created during those first prompts. So if we click that, we can look at kind of what's in here. But this file is basically just going to be responsible for everything related to the game player itself. And the AI kind of set up some things that it thought we would end up needing, and we might have to modify these later. But it's got some basic stuff set up for checkpoint tracking, some basic stuff set up for timers. It also added a way to track some statistics, which I may or may not use. So I put a to-do note next to it saying, do we need this? I'm not sure if I want it, but I'm not going to delete it right now. We'll just leave it like this and I'll remove it later if I don't want it. It also initializes our player's game state. So when the player first joins the game, they don't have a current checkpoint. They are not in a timed run. They start out in the lobby. And I could obviously add to this if there's other things that I want to set up right when a player joins a game. And then it's got some basic function setup that we may or may not need later. So a lot of this stuff looks decent, but we won't know if we're actually going to use it till we get further along in the process. But generally speaking, we have a pretty good foundation for our game player file now. The other important file that it made during those first two steps is our config file. So we have this game config file now, and this file is where we're going to keep all of our game constants that we can tweak and change very easily from one file instead of having to dig around all of our other files to change stuff. So for example, the very first thing we have here is lobby spawn point. So this is where we set the spawn point for our player. Now you'll remember in the game manager is where we spawn the player, right? So if we go back to that game manager and we scroll to this player entity.spawn, this is how we're spawning the player, but the location we're spawning them to, we're setting as lobby spawn point. Now in our index file originally, this was just a set of coordinates. Now we're just referencing this lobby spawn point. So if I want to change the spawn point, I can do it in this configuration file. And this is important because eventually we're going to have so many things that we want to change that we're not going to want to be digging through all these other files to find it. So right now, this config file is pretty basic. There's not really much in it other than the spawn point. We've got some colors in here. So let's say I'm way further along in the process and I decide I want to change the color of some of my messages. Instead of having to go back through my game manager and finding our messages and changing the colors that I've got set up, I can just change the color here and it would change it for anything that's referencing that color. Same with our audio settings. So in the game manager, I've set up background music and I have a volume set as our game config.audio.background volume. So if we go to the game config and we go to audio, background volume is here. So if I had a lot of different pieces of music or a lot of different sound effects, instead of having to go through each one and change them, I can just change it one time in this config file and it would change it everywhere else. So that's the value of having this config file. So this game config is for shared settings, and then it created an Obby config, which is just a bunch of placeholders right now because we haven't done anything with our Obby mode yet. But when we do, we can set up things specific to our Obby mode in the Obby config. So hopefully all that makes sense. The whole reason why we set up that file structure plan to begin with is because As you go, your files end up getting really, really large, and it's a problem because it's hard to find things. And also, it's a problem when coding with AI when your files are long because it has a hard time working with them and it has a hard time editing them after they go past a certain length. So instead of everything existing in our index file like it originally was, we've now split it out into all these different files, and we will continue to add files as we go to keep it really, really organized and easier to maintain. Remember, if at any point along the way while you're doing these steps you don't understand something, it's really important that you highlight the part that you don't understand and ask the AI to explain it. Otherwise, you will be overwhelmed later in the process if you don't understand how your code is structured and how it's being built out. So, with our structure set up, let's go ahead and go back to our development plan and let's run through this entire methodology for step 3. And again, the first step in this methodology is to prep. So in our prep step, we're going to want to understand what our step is. We're going to modify it if necessary, and we're going to create any placeholder assets that we need. So let's start by just understanding the step 3 that we're on. So step 3 in our development plan is the checkpoint system foundation. The goal is to create the basic checkpoint system for progression tracking. Our tasks are to create a checkpoint entity, implement basic checkpoint collision detection, create our checkpoint system for managing progression, and add checkpoint activation, visual, audio, feedback. The files that we're going to create are the checkpoint entity file and the checkpoint system file. The key features here list collision detection with players, sequential checkpoint progression, visual feedback on activation, respawn point setting, and our success criteria is players can activate checkpoints in sequence to see progression feedback. So obviously, at a high level in step 3, we are just creating our checkpoints, but we actually don't have everything ready that we need to start this step. And that is because we are creating a checkpoint entity, but we don't have a model yet for our checkpoint. Now, you might remember at the beginning of this video, I talked about how we're only coding today. We're not making models. We're not context switching over to some right-brained activity like that. But we still need to create the checkpoint entity. So we have to have something that for now we can use as a placeholder for this. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to start by going to my assets folder up here and our models. And I'm going to create a new folder in models that I'm going to call Volcano Dash. So I'm going to right click models. I'm going to go to new folder and I'm going to say Volcano Dash. Now, right now, we have a lot of default models from Hytopia. So we're just going to find one that we can use as a placeholder for our checkpoints. And if you don't know what the models look like, you can actually go to a GLTF viewer. So if you go to Google, you can just type in GLTF viewer. And you can just click this first one. And this is a website where you can just drag model files in and it will show you what they look like. So I'm going to find my Hytopia folder, Volcano Dash, assets, models, and I'm going to look at these models. I know there's one in structures, this one called jump pad. Let's pull that into here. And you can see what it looks like. That looks like a decent checkpoint to use as a placeholder to me. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. So back inside of Cursor, I'm going to go into structures. I'm going to find the jump pad and I'm going to press Control C to copy it. And I'm going to highlight my Volcano Dash folder and I'm going to press Control V to paste it. So now I've made a copy of this jump pad file. And now I'm going to rename it. So I'm going to highlight the file. I'm going to press F2 and then I'm going to call this checkpoint. So now I have a checkpoint model file that I can reference when I'm prompting. All right, so now let's go back to our planning document and let's see what else it said. So we're going to create a checkpoint entity. We're going to create a checkpoint system. And it talks about visual and audio feedback. The visual feedback, we don't need to worry about right now, but we do need to have some sort of placeholder audio for our checkpoint. So once again, I'm going to go into assets. I'm going to go to audio. I'm going to go to sound effects, and I'm going to find some sound that I can use as a placeholder. So let's just look at some of these. And let's just use this inventory grab item. We don't really need to spend a whole lot of time on this. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back to audio. And I'm going to right click and I'm just going to make a new folder in here called Volcano Dash. Again. And inside this folder, so I'm in audio Volcano Dash. I'm going to paste the sound that I just made a copy of. And I'm going to call this checkpoint. So now we have a checkpoint.mp3 for our sound, and we have a checkpoint.gltf for our model. And what we're going to do is we're going to use these as placeholders now, and then later in our polishing step, we can actually just replace these files with new files, and then those files will be in our game instead. All right, so going back to our development plan, we created a placeholder for our entity, we created a placeholder for our audio, and I think that's everything we need to start prompting. Okay, so I have kind of a long and detailed prompt here, but I will read it to you. It says, please proceed with phase 1, step 3 of our @developmentplan.md. Please use @checkpoint.gltf for our checkpoint entity. Please use checkpoint.mp3 for our checkpoint audio feedback. The checkpoint should be a sensor collider. This is why I say you should read the dev docs, because I referenced some things in this prompt that I know about from reading the dev docs. So the checkpoint should be a sensor collider. The Obby config should allow us to add checkpoints by just adding a number and a location. That way we can add as many checkpoints as we want. I have this because I'm not sure how many checkpoints I want. I want to be able to easily add or remove them first while we're developing, but also as I build the map out later, if I wanted to add more checkpoints, I want that to be as easy as possible. The checkpoint should be initialized in the game manager. So when the server starts, we want to make sure our checkpoints are initialized at that time. And then it says, please reference Hytopia documentation for correct implementation of entities and colliders. Do not work ahead. We are not adding respawn logic or anything right now. I added that just to make sure it doesn't, do too much at once. And we're in agent mode, and I'm going to go ahead and give this a shot in auto mode. So it's made our to-do list. It's referencing Hytopia documentation. It's reading through what we already have. And it's going to get to work. All right, and it looks like it is done. So it's created a lot of files. It fixed a lot of errors along the way. And let's just take a look. So anything in yellow is something that it's changed. Anything in blue is something that it's created. So it's created this new checkpoint entity file. It's created our checkpoint system file. It's updated our game manager, and you can see highlighted in green the stuff that it's added. And it's updated our Obby config, and this is where our checkpoint locations are. So now that it's done running, we can move on to step 3, which is our examine step. So the first question is, does the code work? I always like to just check this right away to make sure there's no major issue that we have. So the server is running. When agent mode is working, as it goes, as it's creating files and changing things, it puts it into this auto save state. So the server is constantly updating while it's making changes. And now that it's done, we can see that it is populated. We do have our checkpoints. Right now they're floating in the air, which is a problem, but at least we know the server is running. So does it accomplish the goal? We don't really know because the checkpoints are in the air. And that's just because the positions that it's set here have it way up in the sky. So I'm going to change these all to 2 to get them down lower and see if that's a good spot for them. And our server is loaded. I've got the tab muted, so I'm going to unmute it so I can hear things. And these are all of our checkpoints. They're close enough now to collide with, so I'm going to just cross them and see what it's doing. So it made the sound. I don't know if you could hear that, but it made the sound and it says checkpoint 1 activated. So let's keep going. 2, 3, 4, 5. Great. I'm going to go ahead and mute that again. So the basic functionality of our checkpoints is definitely working, right? We've got a few little things that we need to tweak, but generally speaking, it's working good. So let's take a look at this Obby config to start. I'm going to go ahead and keep all of the changes in this file, and I'm just going to read what it's done. Obby mode settings. So these are our checkpoints. So presumably, if this is functioning correctly, right, I can add a 6th checkpoint here. So let's add a 6th one. And let's say we're going to put it at 10, Y2, and we'll do Z 18. Let's just put it in a weird spot. So I'm going to save that. So we've got a 6th checkpoint now, which is now going to be our ending one. So I'm going to load back into the server. We can see that weird one over there. That's going to be our 6th one. So let's go across them. 1, 2, and it's saying 2 of 6. Remember before it said, would have said 2 of 5. Now it's 2 of 6, 3, 4, 5. And our last checkpoint, 6. Great. So we've confirmed that we can add and remove checkpoints and put them wherever we want, and it still works fine. So that looks good. Our checkpoint config, checkpoint specific settings, checkpoint positions, add more by adding new entries with sequential numbers. I don't know why it says that, so I'm going to So all that looks good in our Obby config. Let's go ahead to our game manager and let's see what it's done over here. So in the game manager, it's importing from our checkpoint systems file and it's initializing our checkpoint systems. And this is the function that handles that. And this is handling what happens when we complete it. So to do future steps, we'll add crown rewards and other completion features. That looks good. So everything in the game manager looks correct to me. All right, so let's look at our checkpoint entity and let's see what it's done. So in this file, this is where it's actually creating the new entity for the checkpoint. So we've got the model, we've got the scale, we've got some collider information. Remember I said I wanted it to be a sensor, which means that the player doesn't actually physically collide with it. It just runs into it and it triggers something to happen when it crosses that, boundary, but it doesn't stop the player's actual movement. So this is the constructor that creates the entity. Next up, we have the audio. So this is when it's going to create the audio for the checkpoint activation. The only thing I don't like about this is we've set the volume here, but we do have in that game config file that sound effects option for volume. So I'm going to actually highlight this and I'm going to press Control I, and I'm going to have it change that to reference the game config instead. Please change this volume to reference the game config sound effects audio instead. I'm going to hit Enter. And you can see now it's changed this file. Instead of doing 0.7, it's now referencing the sound effects volume. I'm going to keep going. This section is talking about what happens when the collision actually happens. So it's saying if the thing colliding with the checkpoint is a player, then run this activate function, right? And this activate function plays the audio, and then it sends the player the message that we saw, and it triggers a callback. And it sets up a couple other helpful functions like get the current checkpoint number, get if it's activated, reset, etc. Nothing we really need to dig too much into. And then it set up the checkpoint system. So the checkpoint entity handles just what one checkpoint does. The checkpoint system handles managing all of the checkpoints in the world. So it's got this function to initialize all of our checkpoints. It's got this function to handle checkpoint activation. It has one set up to handle when a player completes the obby, which we saw functioning, etc. So everything seems to be working really, really good. The only thing that is not good at this point is the fact that these checkpoints are still floating in the air. And we do not want them floating in the air. We want them to land on the ground. So we're going to tell the AI that we're happy other than this fact. So I said, everything looks great for step 3, except the checkpoints are floating in the air. Can you please have them to where they fall straight down when they spawn instead so that they land on the ground? So it says I'll fix the checkpoints. The issue is that they're currently using rigid body type fixed, but now we need to use dynamic so that gravity can affect it. So let's see, it changed our checkpoint entity file. So let's look at that. So now instead of rigid body type fixed, it's now dynamic, meaning it can move, and enable rotations. It's false on all of them. So it's not spinning, and hopefully they don't just fly through the ground, which is a risk that we have taken. And I think they did. I think they flew straight to the ground. Because it's a sensor collider and we have it being affected by gravity, it fell right through the floor, right? So now we need to make sure that it's saying actually you do collide with the floor. Okay, so I said, okay, now unfortunately they fell right through the floor. We need them to collide physically with the blocks, but not the player. Okay, let's see if this is correct now. So now we've got them sitting on the floor like they should, but now we are colliding with them physically. So we have a little bit more work to do. I know from reading the docs that the problem is it's not set up any collision groups, which we need to do right now. Okay, I said, okay, this is better, but we need to set up a collision group. This player is physically colliding with it. Please reference Hytopia documentation for best practices. Okay, it's done. Let's see if it's working. Okay, now the sensor collider is not working at all. So now the collisions are working physically, but now our functionality is broken, right? I'm running across the checkpoints and nothing's happening, so we're still not quite there. I need to do some more tweaking. Okay, so I said, it is still not working. Nothing is happening when the player runs across the sensor. Let's see what it did. All right, now it's working. 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I said, okay, now please clean up any unused code and correct any old comments. So it's removing the collision groups that it set up originally that weren't working. It's checking the Obby config for outdated comments. Okay, so it's cleaned it all up, or so it says. Let's make sure after the cleanup, everything is still working. Actually, let me turn on my sound again. Make sure the sound. All right, the sounds are working also. All right, so that's the end of step 3. Everything looks good to me, and I can move on to step 4, which is the cleanup step. So I'm going to go through and check the comments. I'm going to add any to-dos, and I'm going to clean up any unnecessary lines of code. I already asked the AI to make a pass at that, but I'm also going to just double check myself so that things don't get too messy down the line. I'm going to add a to-do here. Remember, this is just a placeholder model, and I want to make sure that when we have our real model in later that our colliders are still the appropriate size. So I'm going to add a to-do for this. Verify colliders are sized properly for final model. All right, so let's go back to the development plan and let's make sure we've got everything done for this. So we've created our files. We have collision detection. We have sequential checkpoint progression. We have visual feedback on activation. We don't have respawn point setting because we're not going to worry about that just yet. So visual feedback on activation. We need to actually do one more thing I want to add a to-do for this. So I'm going to go to my checkpoint system. Right now it's giving us those messages, right? For when we cross a checkpoint. We might want to do something else later though. So I added a to-do that just said to do other visual checkpoint feedback, and I'll consider how I want to do this in the polish step. All right, I think we're good. I think we've got everything we need now for this step 3 and we can call it good. So the very last step we have is to commit these changes to GitHub. So I'm going to go to my version control. So I said checkpoints complete, phase 1, step 3. I'm going to hit the plus to stage all of these changes, and I'm going to hit commit, and I'm going to sync the changes. And now we can move on to step 4. So this step is our untimed Obby mode. So this is going to be our first full game loop in our game. So we have 3 different modes, and each mode will need its own game loop. This untimed mode will be the first one that we're doing. So I'm going to go through that entire methodology that we just did in step 3 for step 4. But instead of showing you that, I'm actually just going to come back afterwards and show you how the game loop setup actually works, because I feel like that'll be the most valuable information to come out of this step. All right, so I've just finished setting up the untimed Obby mode, and I just want to show you a couple of things that I feel like will be helpful to you. So I'm going to start in the game manager. So in our game manager now, we have this initialize game function. And in the initialize game function, we're initializing our checkpoint system. So we're setting up all of our checkpoints. And now we're also initializing our untimed Obby. So if we go to our Obby manager, which is down here in our Obby folder, this is a new file that we've created now. And inside of this file, we have the functions to start our untimed mode and to end our untimed mode, as well as a few other things. So the first thing we have in here is the setup checkpoint hooks. And these are the things that are going to trigger our game start and game end. So for this first one, when the player gets to checkpoint number 1, it's going to call this start untimed Obby function. And then over here, it's saying when the player gets to the last checkpoint, it's going to call our end untimed Obby function. So looking at the start untimed Obby function, you can see down here, it's first checking to make sure the player's current game mode is lobby. And then if that's true, then it's going to set the new game mode to untimed Obby, and it's going to give them this message that the untimed Obby has started. So I'm going to go over to the game player file just for a second so you can see these different modes. So in my game player entity file, you can see we're tracking the game state, and it's with this constant called game mode, and we can change between lobby, untimed mode, timed Obby, or lava rising. So right now we start the game in lobby mode, and now we've set up untimed Obby. So going back to our Obby manager, so when the player crosses that first checkpoint right here, it's going to trigger the start untimed Obby, and when that happens, it's going to make sure the player's current state is lobby, and if it is, it's going to set their state to untimed Obby, and then it's going to give them this message that it started. And then here, if they cross the last checkpoint, it's going to trigger our end untimed Obby function. And if we scroll down and look at that, we can see in this function, make sure the mode is in untimed Obby. If not, ignore it. And if it is currently untimed Obby, then set it back to lobby. And then it's also going to reset the player's checkpoint system back to having no checkpoint. And then it's going to reset the player's progress. So it's basically setting it back to the defaults, like as if it had never crossed the checkpoint. It's going to send them a message saying, congratulations, you finished it. And then it's going to run this other function that says, give trophy to the player's right hand. That's kind of a weird function name, but whatever. So if we look at that function now, we can see it's spawning a trophy in their right hand. Right now, it's just a piece of bread because, again, I used a placeholder model like we did in step 3. The other thing I wanted to show you is we also have set up our lava collision. So basically, this is saying if a player runs into a lava block, respawn them at whatever checkpoint they're at. So let's look at how all of this code is currently working. All right, so now we're in the world, and I'm going to cross this first checkpoint, which is going to trigger our untimed obby. So you can see it says untimed obby started, reached the final checkpoint. So I'm going to go through a few checkpoints. I'm going to collide with this lava block over here that I added just to test. And you can see I respawned at the checkpoint. Then I'm going to complete the obby and I'll get my trophy, which right now is just a piece of bread. That all looks good. I'll obviously fix the positioning and how all this stuff looks later, but right now we're just worried about the core gameplay functions. So hopefully all of that makes sense. So the obby manager is handling our collision logic for the things that will trigger the respawn during the obby. It's handling our reward for this obby, and it's also handling the triggers to start and end the game, and also the functions for what happens when the game is started and the game is ended. And so that completes our step 4, which is the untimed obby mode. And now we can move on to step 5, which is another game mode, and that's our timed obby mode. I'm going to use this section to actually talk about the UI because up until this point in our game, we've been giving all of our feedback to the player through the chat box. And that's not actually going to be how we do it in the long run, but that's the easiest way to get immediate feedback while we're working. With the timer system, it's actually time to start setting up the UI functionality. So I've already done step 5, which was just a simple prompt to set up a timer system. This had nothing to do with Hytopia or anything like that. It was just setting up some functions to start our timer, stop our timer, format our timer, stuff like that. So that step is done. And now I'm going to move on to step 6. So let's read this really fast. So this is the setup for our timed obby mode. The goal is to add the timed obby mode with the NPC interaction. We're going to create a timer NPC entity. We're going to add the interaction so that when you interact with the entity, it starts the timer. We're going to integrate the timer system with our checkpoints. We're going to test it, obviously, run validation. And then the last step here is talking about adding a timer UI integration. So what I want to talk about really fast, we're going to actually go over to the Hytopia GitHub. So we're at github.com/HytopiaGG, and I'm going to look at the SDK examples. And I'm going to pull up Frontiers RPG game. If you're not aware, the Hytopia UI file lives in the assets folder. So I'm going to go to the assets folder, and I'm going to go down to UI, and I'm going to open that. And these are all the UI files for the Frontiers game on Hytopia. And the reason why I'm pulling this up is because the way Hytopia works is all of your UI information has to come through one index.html file. And because of that, this index.html file is very, very long. So look at this file for Frontiers. So this file for Frontiers is 8,881 lines of code. That's a lot, and obviously extremely difficult to maintain, and also extremely difficult for the AI to edit correctly as you're prompting. So what he did in this game is actually, I'm going to go back out to the UI folder. He actually created this build.js file. And this is some code that basically says, create my index.html file by compiling all these different files together and adding them together. So, and you can see that he lists all these different files in here that he runs a script to just compile it all to get the one index file. But when he's working, he can work in separate files to edit the UI. So let me give you an example. So you see this folder, he's got all of his menus. And so he's got a merchant menu, quest menu, skills menu. So if he wants to change his crafting menu, instead of having to dig through that really, really long file, he can just go into this crafting file. And this is all the code for the crafting menu, right? So we want to make sure that we set up our project in a similar way so that it's easier to maintain our UI files. So I showed you all that because this is going to be really important when it comes to our first prompt that we're going to do to set this all up. Okay, so this is kind of a long prompt, but it says, we are going to be working on step 6 of our development plan soon, but before we do that, we need to set up our UI system. Please look at the Frontiers example game. In that example, they have many separate HTML files that are compiled with the build.js file into the final into the final index.html file. This can all be seen in assets/UI. In that setup, they are using bun to compile all of those files, but we want to just use node.js. You might not need to write that if Frontiers has been updated, but for now, we moved away from bun, so we just want to do it with node.js. In Frontiers' package.json file, you can see some scripts for compiling the file. Please create this exact same setup for us. For now, I want you to use Frontiers as an example and create, number 1, a folder in our @UI folder for scene UIs, a gamehud.html placeholder file, a build.js file, and then scripts in our @package.json file. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then I say, please make sure you use the Hytopia MCP server for this. And I'm going to be in agent mode, and I'm going to use Claude 4 for this one, just to make sure that it gets it right. Okay, now it's asking if it can check the examples. So now it is officially done. One thing that I had to do along the way is it was having a hard time finding the build.js file. So I actually went to the GitHub and I downloaded it. I'll leave a link to this in the description, and you can just download this build.js file. And then what I did was I created a new folder in my Volcano Dash folder called examples. And I moved that build.js file into there. And then I told Cursor to use that as an example for the one that it builds for us. Okay, so now what we have is we have our index.html file, right? But this file is just created by merging all of these other files together. So as we add UI elements, if we want to separate them out into their own file to make it easier to edit, we will be able to still compile them into this one index file for Hytopia to use. One of the things that it also did for me is in this package.json file, it added some new scripts. And it added this build UI script, and it added this watch command, right? And so now I'm going to just ask it a question. I'm going to say, okay, what command should I use while developing to make sure the index file auto updates for me? And it gives me this command. So I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to start a new terminal right here. I'm just going to hit this plus, which will open a second terminal. I'm going to paste in that command. And now it's watching for changes in my UI file. So now let's just, as an example, we'll go to this game HUD and we're going to change this lives. I'm going to say, this is my new change, right? And I'm going to save that. So now it just rebuilt our UI. And if I go into our index file now, you can see this is my new change is in the index file. So now I'm going to go back into the game HUD. I'm going to take this bar out. I'm going to hit save. It said it rebuilt the UI, and I'm going to go back, and you can see that it's back to how it was before. So you'll see the value in doing this later, but I just wanted to show you how I'm setting this up so that as I'm using it, it'll make sense to you. So we've got our UI structure set up. We've got a placeholder model for the entity. We're going to want a placeholder sound, I guess, for when this game mode starts. And sure, I'm just going to take this splash sound just so that I know it's very different. And I'm going to make a copy of it. I'm going to call it timer mode start. And I think that should be good. Okay, so this is kind of a long prompt, but it's a big step. We'll see how it does. So it says, let's work on phase 1, step 6 of our development plan. Here are some notes. Use the @timer NPC GLTF. Create a place in the game config to define its spawn point. Use the sound timer-mode-start MP3 when the time mode starts. Have a clear start timer mode and end timer mode function. Timer mode should start when interacting with the NPC with E while the player is in the lobby state. Timer mode should end when the player crosses the last checkpoint in the timed lobby state. We should store the player's last time and the player's best time. The checkpoint system should work throughout. The timer UI stuff should be added to the at gamehud.html. And then I say, do not run any commands for testing. I will test manually. Be sure to look at the entirety of the project's file structures to make sure you are consistent with what we already have. I am going to use GPT-5 for this because it's probably my favorite model to work with right now. And I feel like this is such a big task. I want to make sure a really good model is working on it for me. All right, so it's finished now. That took good like 10 minutes for GPT-5. GPT-5 is really slow, honestly, but it's good because it usually gets things right. I kind of like to babysit it while it's going and reading everything that it's doing. And I noticed while it was working that it was having to change some stuff in the Obby manager, which was the stuff that we just finished in the previous step. So I'm going to first jump in here and make sure that it's still functioning. I'm even going to turn my sound back on. You can see our guy up there. Okay, so let's check. All right. It looks like this is still working. Fine. Okay. So all that's working good. Okay, so it spawned an NPC, obviously, as we can see, but it's floating in the air. We want to go ahead and make that one drop to the ground so we can actually interact with it and make sure everything else is working. I know from before that this is because of this rigid body type fixed. It needs to be dynamic, so I'm not even going to ask it to change that. I'm going to just change that myself. And then it should fall to the ground now. Yeah, there he is. He kind of fell through the floor, but we'll worry about the collider in a bit. So it's supposed to be now that if I come close to him and I press E, the timed mode started. And so I'm going to go through the checkpoints to finish this mode. Okay. And I got 8 seconds. I have my best time. I have my last time. I'm going to do it again. Okay. The time mode start again. I'm going to wait a little bit longer just to make the time longer so that it can save a best and a last. Okay, so now it's got my best time, which was the first time, and my last time. Okay, and now I'm going to see if I can beat my best time. And so I'm going to start it and see if it replaces the time. Okay, and it did. So my best time is my last time now. And obviously this stuff is super hard to see because the chat's like over top of it, but we'll fix all that stuff later. For now, I'm just making sure everything's working, and it is. So let's go ahead and fix this collider on this guy. All of the functionality seems to be working. In fact, let me make sure that I can still enter the other Obby mode, and I can. So all the functionality is working, but there's just a couple of little tweaks that we need to make. Okay, so I said, okay, for the timer NPC, is there a way to use the default Hytopia collider, but then add a standalone sensor collider to attach it to the entity or something? Okay, so I think it's probably fixed it now. Okay, yeah. So now it's got the correct collider, and let's see if I can still interact with it, and I can. Also, I'm pretty sure if I run into this guy, yeah, he falls over. So I need to make sure that he can't be moved by the player. So now we've disabled rotation. So now when I run into him, I'm not like pushing him over anymore. Okay, so all of that is working, and I just committed it to GitHub. And then I also just realized that I'm missing one more thing that I want to add to this NPC is a scene UI that pops up to tell us, you know, what to do when we get close to it. Because right now the player doesn't know to hit E. So I'm going to add that next. So remember earlier in this step, we set up this folder to hold our scene UI. So we're going to be adding a scene UI for our timer NPC entity into here. So I'm going to go ahead and write a prompt for that. Okay, so my prompt is please add a scene UI and attach it to the timer NPC entity. Please create the UI HTML file for this in the scene UI folder and make sure to add the new file into the list in our build.js file. The scene UI should say timed Obby mode, press E to start timer. Please make sure to reference Hytopia documentation to properly implement the scene UI. I'm going to do this with Claude 4 just because this is our first scene UI in the project and I want to make sure it gets it right. Okay, and it's done and it's summarizing our changes, but we can also just see what it did by looking at anything that's got a new color. So it's created this new timer NPC UI file, and this is all of the info for that. Timer style. and then the script to register the template. So that's good. In the build.js file, it added our timer NPC. That way it's getting compiled into that final index file. And then it also updated our timer NPC entity to import our scene UI stuff from Hytopia, and then created a function to create the scene UI. And then here it is where it created the UI. Okay, and you can see the UI is there. It's hard to see right now, but it's there. So we'll fix that in the polish step, but for now we can at least see it. All right, and with that, our step 6 is actually complete for real this time. So I'm gonna just commit this little change that we made. So I just said added scene UI to timer NPC, and I'm going to commit that and sync. All right, so we're getting close to the end of the first phase here. We've got 2 steps left in it. Step 7 is the leaderboard step. And this is a great step to talk about persistence, data persistence. And that's when you can save a player's data so that the next time they log into your game, it's still there. So we're going to set that up now for our leaderboard. So let's just look at what this step says though. So leaderboards, the goal is to add leaderboard system for personal best and global rankings. We're going to create a leaderboard system file. We're going to add personal best time storage, which we've actually already done. We're going to add global leaderboard for fastest times. We're going to integrate with existing UI systems and add leaderboard persistence. So the files to create is just the leaderboard system, and our key features, personal best tracking, which we already have, global leaderboard for the top. We'll just do top 10 times. Real-time leaderboard updates, persistent storage of records. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and tackle this step. I'm going to open a new chat. So my prompt is kind of a long one, but this is what it says. Please help me implement step 7 of our development plan. Some notes. Number 1, we already finished the personal best time storage, but we still need to add player persistence for this. We want to store this so that the next time the player logs in, they see their best time. Number 2, we want to add a leaderboard system that tracks the top 10 fastest times. We want this to be globally persisted. Anytime a player has a new best time, it should be checked against the leaderboard times to see if it makes the rankings. Number 3, we want the leaderboard to be displayed as a scene UI. Please create a new HTML file in our scene UI folder to display the top 10 scores. We're going to set this to a fixed position that we define in our game config file. So scene UIs, these are UIs that are displaying like in the scene, not the overlay like the game HUD, but actually in the scene. They can either be attached to the entity like we did with our timer NPC entity where we had it like hovering over the guy, or you can attach it to a fixed position. So we're going to make our leaderboard attached to a fixed position. And then of course I say make sure to refer to Hytopia documentation for how to handle player and global persistence. All right, so while it was working, I noticed it said it was going to create a leaderboard display entity, which we do not need. We're going to just attach it to a fixed position. So I stopped it and I'm correcting it as it goes. It's good to babysit it as it's going and just kind of keep up with what it's doing. And if it seems to be doing something kind of weird, just stop it and redirect it. Okay, so it thinks it's done it all. Let's check and see if it got it right. All right, so we do have a leaderboard, but it's not a scene UI, right? It's showing up over here as an overlay UI. So let's take a look at why that is. So first of all, let's look at what it's made. So it made this leaderboard HTML file, which is great. We can keep this. So on the game configs file, it's added a location for the leaderboard spawn point, which is good. It's also added our leaderboard setting config. So if I wanted to change the number of entries or update the interval or any of this stuff, we can do that. It added our leaderboard system file, which is this one. It's got some errors in it though, so we're going to have it fix that in just a minute. On our game manager, it integrated our system that it just made. In the game player, it added a way to store the personal best time, it looks like. Okay, so we definitely have some problems with what it's done. First of all, as soon as I finished the Obby, the server crashed, so that's a problem. But it did properly create the persistence files. So when you're making persistence files in Hytopia, when you're doing it in a local environment, it's going to create this new folder called dev/persistence. And this is just so you can test persistence locally. So you can see we've created this player2.json file, which has saved my personal best time for this player. And each player will have their own file that gets saved, and any of their personal data will get saved into their own file. And then we also have this global persistence file that we've named volcano-global leaderboard. When we click on this, we can see that it saved my player ID, my username, my time, and then the date that I completed the run. And presumably, as more players play the game, this will continue to fill out with more times. But we have problems. So we're going to address our errors and then take it from there. So first of all, in our leaderboard system, if I haven't showed you this before, in the terminal all the way to the left, there's this tab for problems. So you can click on that, and I'm just going to right click and I'm going to copy, and it's going to copy all these problems. I'm going to say, okay, please help me fix these issues. And then I said, also the server crashed the first time a new player was saving data, because that's what happened. I'm going to go into my terminal and I'm going to copy the error message that it had so I can try to fix it. So please try and fix that. So I've pasted both errors that we are having that we know are problems for now, and we're going to see how it does fixing those. Okay, so it says it's fixed all of these issues, and let's see if it actually has. Back on the server, scene UI shows up, and I'm going to start my timed mode. And the server did not crash, which is great. And it says player 1 set a new record, which that's my player's name. And okay, all of that worked fine. And then if we look over here, we have created a new file for player 1. We've got the player 2 file still, and then player 1 is showing on the leaderboard. It looks like it might have overridden player 2's time though, so let's take a look. I'm going to add another player into the game, and then I'm going to run the obby with this guy, and I'm going to see what happens. Okay, so this player set a new record, and this is player 2. So it should have updated my player 2 time, which it did. But it also, yeah, it's replacing the player 1 time. So I'm going to tell it that it's just replacing. I said, okay, that works now, but only the most recent time is getting saved in the global leaderboard. We want the overall top 10 times saved here. Right now, each time someone completes the timed obby, the save time gets overridden. So we're going to have that fix that. But I'm also going to make player 4.json, and I'm going to save just like a random time for player 4. And so now I'm going to join, and this should put me in as player 4. And it does, but it's not displaying my time from last time. Also, when a player joins a server that has a saved personal best time, it isn't displaying. We need to update the game HUD UI to display the player persisted personal bests. Okay, so it says it's fixed everything. And because I know it's changed how it's handling this leaderboard, I'm actually going to delete all of these files so that we can test it again. All right, so let's run this as player 2. All right, so player 2 set a record, my new personal bests. I've got player 2's time, and I have a player 2 record there. So now I'm going to add another player. And I'm going to start the obby. Okay, this player has set a record. And okay, so now my global leaderboard is storing multiple players. And it looks to be storing it in the correct order. Let me add a third player and try to beat the record. And this is going to be player 4. All right, so I'm going to try to beat the record now. All right, so that beat the record for sure. So let's see if it put this player 4 in first place, and it did. Player 4 is in first place. All right. So all of that is now working correctly. And then the other thing I need to see is if a player's persistent score actually displays when it loads in. So I'm going to just like make a new time for player 5. I'm going to press save, and I'm going to join as player 5. And it does show my best time now in the corner there. So all of those issues are fixed. The only remaining issue is I don't see the actual leaderboard displaying anywhere. So we need to figure out why our scene UI is not appearing. So I'm going to go to my leaderboard system. First of all, I'm going to keep all of these things. And I'm going to search for scene UI. So I don't even think it created a scene UI for this. Okay, so I said, okay, that works great. Now the only thing left is we have not created the scene UI for our leaderboard. We need to create and also register a scene UI in the leaderboard HTML file. I think you may have set it up as an overlay UI by mistake. All right, so there's two things that I don't like about what we've got. So it's registered our scene UI inside of the game manager, and I'd rather move it to the leaderboard system. So I'm going to ask it to move it. So I said, can we create the scene UI for the leaderboard inside of the leaderboard system instead of the game manager? I'd like to only initialize it in the game manager and not create it there. So I'm going to have it change that. All right, so now it's moved the leaderboard scene UI creation out of this game manager and moved it into the leaderboard system, which is where I would like it. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the view distance because I do not like how close I have to be to see it. So I'm going to make it like 20. All right, so now we need the leaderboard to actually show data. It's not showing any data yet. Great, now we need the leaderboard to actually populate with the username and time. Right now, it just says loading data. Okay, so it says it's loading it with 3 entries now. Let's see if that's true. Okay, great. And now we have players showing on the leaderboard. And now I'm player 1. So I'm going to go ahead and run the Obby. And I'm going to see what happens when I'm added to the leaderboard. And then, yeah, so player 4 showed up on the leaderboard. Great. Obviously, this looks horrible right now, but this is not the time to polish things. We're just getting everything functioning, and we'll get all the polished stuff fixed later. But with that done, let's look at our planning file really fast. It looks like we've got everything done for our leaderboard. So we can go ahead and commit this. So I said leaderboard setup complete. I'm going to stage the changes. I'm going to commit them, and I am going to sync them. Okay, and that is the end of our step 7 leaderboards. And then our step 8 for this game was polishing and testing the Obby modes to fix any issues. It talks about adding sound effects and testing edge cases and all this kind of stuff. I actually don't want to do this yet, but I do want to point out that something that I haven't mentioned as it relates to polish is that I added a notepad down here for polish tasks. And when I click on that, you can see that I'm keeping track of sounds and models that I need to like remake and polish. So I think I need to make sure that's up to date. So if I go to my audio folder, checkpoint, final checkpoint, and I've got timer mode start. I need to make sure I have a timer mode start time sound. And then in the models, I have the checkpoint, I've got the trophy, and now I also have the timer NPC. So I'm going to add that. So these are sounds I need to create or bring into the game. These are models that I need to create or bring into the game. I have a note that I want to add a sound for lava collision. I still need to code that. And for my overlay UI, I need to have a message about using Q to quit. I also need to add Q to quit timed Obby mode. Let me think what else we are missing at this point. All right, so I guess before we move on to starting our lava rising mode, I will do a few of these polish steps that I have listed here. So I don't need to clean up the messages just yet. I do want to add Q to quit the timed Obby mode. So I'm going to do that now. So it's going to work on that. So this is in progress. We don't need to clean up the messages. We do need to get our current checkpoint to display during our obbies. Okay, so it says it's working. So let's see if that's true. So we started the time mode and Q quit the time mode. Okay, I'm starting the untimed mode. Q to quit the untimed mode. So that's done. We're still going to clean up the messages later. Current checkpoint to display during the obbies. Okay. All right. So I said, next up, I want to add to the game HUD to display the current checkpoints number. If you didn't know this, so if you only make changes to UI files, it's not going to automatically refresh the server. So you're going to want to like just save a random game file. So I just like added a space to this note and I'm hitting save, and that's going to actually reload the server. So now I can see the changes in the UI. Okay, so now it says checkpoint 00, which is great. We've got a slot for it, but it's not actually wired into our checkpoints. I said, okay, we need to integrate it with our actual checkpoint logic now instead of displaying fake numbers. Okay, it says it's done. So let's see if it works. I don't think it's going to work yet. Oh, it is. 4, 5, 6. Okay, so it looks like that works. And let's go back to our polish tasks. So the current checkpoint displays during the obbies, that's done. I need to add a quit message to the overlay UI, but I'm not going to do that now because that's not, I don't know how I want to do it. I need to add a sound for lava collision. So let's go through the sound effects really fast. Look at damage. We'll just do this one. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to Volcano Dash and I'm going to call this lava collision. Okay. So I said I need to add sound effects whenever a player collides with the lava. The file is lavacollision.mp3. All right, so it says it is implemented now. Let's see if it's working. I'm going to turn the sound on. And I'm going to collide with the lava. Okay. I'm going to quit that mode. I'm going to test it in the timed mode. Okay. And I'm going to go back to my polish tasks. This is done. All right, so now for our polish tasks, we have to make these 4 sounds. We have to make these 3 models. And then we have to make our overlay nice. And then we will have to clean up all the messages in the server as well. All right, going back to our development plan. I think that's good for step 8. We'll do more testing, and obviously we're going to have a whole video about polish, and we'll do some more testing later as well. So now we can actually move on to phase 2 of this game, which is our last game mode, the lava rising mode. So if you've watched this far and all you're making is an obby, then you've already done everything that you need to do to get your obby going, and you can go ahead and make the map. But for me, I actually have a third game mode in this game, which was actually the foundation of the original game, which is the lava rising mode. And I'm obviously coming back here on a new day, and I've done some of these steps already. And as I was filming the video, I realized that the video is getting extremely long, and explaining every little detail as I go probably wouldn't be super beneficial to you because it's really, really specific to the game that I'm building. So instead of doing that, I'm going to come back today and point out a few things that I think would be most helpful to you. So the first thing I did was I actually had to rearrange my development plan a little bit at this point, because as I was reading through my next steps, I realized there were some things missing. It wasn't quite right. So the first thing I did was I tweaked my plan a little bit to make it make more sense for what I was building. And then this beginning step was just laying the foundation. And just like with the other game modes, we created a manager for our game mode and we created a config file for our game mode. So let's take a look at the manager really fast. So it's called Lava Rising Manager. And this game mode, what's different about it is instead of just having like a start game and an end game kind of situation, I also have a queue in this game. So when people first talk to the NPC to join this mode, they're placed into a queue. So I have the queue system set up with a function, and then I have a function to start the game and a function to end the game. And then the other thing I have is this Lava Rising config file. And I haven't cleaned up my comments yet, so just ignore all the extra comments everywhere. But the point of this file is there's a lot of different things going on in this game mode, right? And like I said before when we were talking about our other configs, I don't want to have to dig through all my Lava Rising files to change different things. So this is how I change how long you're waiting in the queue. This is how I change where the NPC spawns, the number of people per game, the size of my lava block, which we'll talk about in a minute, the different scoring points and what they're worth. So I can handle all of my game balance stuff just from this one file. So that was the first part of step 9. So just my setup functions to make sure it's easy to manage the game loop and easy to manage the different parameters in the game to balance it well. The second part of my step 9 was creating the lava rising entity. And the thing I want to point out about this part is the way that I'm handling the lava rising is by using what's called block entities. So I'm going to open up the dev docs and I'm actually going to go to entities, block entities, just to talk about this for a second. So this is one of those things that might not necessarily be really apparent that you can do with Hytopia if you haven't read the docs. So this page tells you all about what block entities are, but just to give you an example, let's start the server. So you can see in my server over here this big chunk of lava. And while you may think that this is a bunch of blocks placed on top of each other, it's actually not. It's a block entity. So let me pull that open here. Go to lava rising entities, lava entity. So this file is how I'm creating this lava block. And you can see here that when I'm making the entity, I'm given it a block texture URI, which is lava, and block half extents. Now, the half extents I'm defining inside of the config file. So let's take a look at that. Lava rising config, and here are the half extents. Half extents determine the size of the block entity, and each half a unit is a block. So right now, because it's 2 by 6 by 2, the actual entity itself is 4 by 12 by 4. So you can see in the game, this is 4 blocks wide by 4 blocks deep, and if I jump down here, you can see the rest of the bottom of it. When I start the game mode, you can see that it will start to move. So that's how I handle the lava rising. It's just a giant block entity of lava that I have moving up and down during the game. And because it's an entity and not just blocks, I can set colliders really easily. So I have it set as a sensor collider. I can set what happens when we collide with it. So you can see in the game, I can, instead of running into it like I am colliding with the floor, I can actually be inside of it, which will be part of our game mechanics later. So this page in the dev docs explains some different things you can do with block entities, like moving platforms. You can make blocks that you can push. You can see this used in a couple of the Hytopia games as well, like the wall dodge game or the hole in the wall game. Those are using block entities, I believe, to do some of those game mechanics. So keep that in mind that this is an option for you. All right, so back to the development plan. There really wasn't anything in my step 10 that I thought would be interesting to talk about. It's just I was setting up a scoring system for my lava game. So you can see in the right-hand side, my energy is increasing for every second I'm surviving in the chamber. And then I have all these different power-ups, which I'll talk about in a second. So my step 10 was just setting up this energy system and setting up this UI to display your score. All right, so that was step 10. And then the thing I wanted to talk about in step 11 was troubleshooting. And the reason why is because I did run into a bunch of little tiny annoying errors the whole time I was working on the power-ups. And there's a few different things that you can do when you're running into like blockers like that. And so I wanted to touch on those really fast while I'm talking about this step. Before we do that, let's just talk about what these power-ups actually are. So the whole goal of this game mode is to collect energy inside of the chamber. And you collect energy at a fixed rate while you're inside the chamber. And then these different power-ups that I've added have other ways of collecting energy. So our shards that you pick up for certain amounts of energy. There's an energy cluster that while you're standing in it, you collect energy at a faster rate. And there's a supercharge station that when you use it, it's a multiplier. So I'll demonstrate those really fast. I'm going to start the game mode. Okay, so you can see these different things. So these little cookie looking things, those are the shards. I'll obviously change out the models later. This is the energy cluster. So while I stand in here, I'm getting it at a faster rate. If I use my supercharge station, I have a multiplier on my energy, and then, I can collect these cookies along the way and, earn energy that way. So while I was working on these, I had a really, really long prompt that I made because I really it was getting late and I was getting tired and I didn't feel like doing each of these one at a time. So I made a really, really long descriptive prompt and I had GPT-5 make all of the power-ups and actually did a pretty good job. It got like 90% of them right away, which is great. But there were a couple of little tiny issues that it was having a hard time fixing. For example, my energy shard is something that you collect. So it spawns them in at the beginning of the round, and then as you collide with them, it collects them. And when it collects it, it despawns it. Well, it's supposed to play a sound, and it wasn't playing the sound. And I was trying everything to try to fix it with GPT-5, and for some reason it wasn't finding it. So my first troubleshooting tip is, if you are having a hard time solving a problem with one of the models, the first thing I would do is switch to a different model. So I switched to Claude 4. It got it right away. And then the problem ended up being that we were playing the sound basically at the same time that we were despawning it. So the sound wasn't getting played. So the AI solved that by just adding a slight delay. So you collide with it, it plays the sound, and like just a slight delay amount of time later, it despawns it. And there are a lot of other little issues while I was working on this step that I fixed like that. But I also just want to mention a couple other troubleshooting things that I ran into while I was working. One of them was, while I was making that lava block entity, the AI had a lot of problems with it for some reason. And it actually took me going into the dev docs, reading this block entities thing again. I copied this block of code, and I made a really, really specific prompt. I gave it this website link, and I gave it this block of code, and I pasted all of that in there. And only when I had done that did it actually get this step right. And that's why it's so important to, like I've said, read the dev docs so you know where things are when the AI is having a hard time, and also know how to search for things in the API reference so that when the AI is stuck, you can give it the correct information to get itself unstuck. And then the other problem that I ran into a lot in this step 11 while I was working is, because of the way we're compiling our UI, you remember we have this build.js file, right? And as we were building each of our UI elements for my power-ups, we have a UI for the energy cluster, we have a UI for the supercharge station, we had a leaderboard for our energy. As we were building all these things, we were adding it to this build.js file, and my command was running. And if you use this method, you might have a slightly different command than I. So just ask your AI, like, what's your command to rebuild the UI? For me, it was this, right? So I have this running in a second terminal. So let me do that again. So I can just hit this plus button to start a second terminal. And I'm going to run that command, right? And this command builds your UI. And it's watching all of these files. So if you make any changes in any of these files, it will rebuild your file. However, if you add to your build.js file, it doesn't automatically watch those files, and it won't necessarily compile them for you. So sometimes you'll have to, if you're adding new UI files and they're not showing up in your game, it's probably because it's not compiling them into the index file like it should. So make sure every once in a while you just double check that it's being compiled. And if it's not, all you have to do is find whatever command that you have built to compile it and just kill the terminal and do it again. I had to do that a few times while I was working, so I just wanted to mention that. So that's step 11 power-ups. These are all done. And now, today, the very last step that I need to do is my hazmat suit. And we're going to use this section to talk about child entities and cosmetics. At the very beginning of this video, when we first loaded the server, I mentioned how your player will spawn with random cosmetics. That's why this character has this weird alien hat and all this armor on and these weapons. This is just an example of having a cosmetic on every part of the body, because players in Hytopia can purchase cosmetics from the marketplace, and they can bring them into your game if you're using the default player. But sometimes those cosmetics are going to interfere with your game's mechanics. So in my case, when a player queues into the lava mode, they're going to be put into a hazmat suit. And my hazmat suit is a full suit. It's on every single node of the body. So I'm going to have to hide all of the player's cosmetics to load my cosmetics. So that's what we're going to be doing in this step. And the last thing I did last night was I built out this step 12 to be more robust. And I also added all of my hazmat suit items into my models. So when I go to assets, models, volcano dash, now I have all my hazmat pieces. And these are older models that I had from when I originally made this game. I'm probably going to modify them, but for now, we can use this to build out this step 12. And since this is the last step of this game, once this is done, all of the core mechanics are going to be done. I'm just, for one last time, I'm going to demonstrate that methodology that I like to use, that I've been using this whole time, even when I haven't showed you every single moment of the process. So again, the very first step is to prep, which I have actually already done. I did that last night. I double checked my step 12 said everything I wanted it to say, and I added all of the missing models into my assets folder so that I could reference them in my prompt. And so my next step, step 2, is to prompt. And because my step 12 is got so much detail in it, my prompt is actually going to be pretty simple for this one. It's, okay, let's complete step 12 of our development plan. All of the hazmat suit files are in the volcano dash folder. This is the correct folder. When you do an at, I'm going to do that again, at volcano dash. I've got a few different folders called volcano dash, but you can see next to it, it shows the full file path. So this is the models folder that I referenced there. And I say, please carefully look at how Hytopia hides player cosmetics. And I have that link right here for it to reference. Please do not work ahead of this step or make any assumptions. Only do the tasks listed in step 12. Follow Hytopia best practices while you work. I'm going to use GPT-5 for this because I trust it the most for a bigger task like this. And I'm going to hit enter. So to be clear, in this step, it's setting up two things for us. It's setting up the hazmat suit itself, and then it's also setting up a damage system that we're going to use to trigger when a player loses the mode. Basically, if their suit overheats, they get transported out of the chamber. While that's working, I'll just show you also what these hazmat suit pieces look like. I'm going to go to that GLTF viewer that I told you about before. And the way child entities work in Hytopia is you can attach them to anchor nodes, and Hytopia documentation lists the anchor nodes that are available, which is like head, torso, back, hands, feet, legs, things like that. And so for me, I have a piece of the hazmat suit for each of those anchor nodes, and it's meant to cover a certain area of the player. So for example, this is my backpack. So this will attach to the back node. And then I've got a helmet that attaches to the player's head. And then there's like, let me find the torso. So here's the torso of the hazmat suit, etc. So I'm adding all these in as separate pieces onto the player. And I'm also going to leave a note for myself in my polished task list about updating the hazmat suit so that I can remember to check into that. All right, it says it is done. I can see already that this is incorrect because this is old. So all these anchor names, they changed from being underscores to being dashes. So I'm going to change all of these really fast and save that just so we know that that's right. Okay, and it just made up a whole bunch of stuff here. The cosmetic hidden nodes, I gave it a list. I gave it this link, right? That shows it what to do. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to this site and I'm going to look at what it's called. So yeah, this is the stuff that it should be using to hide it. We're just going to use all though, because we're going to be hiding everything. I'm going to go back to the suit manager. I'm just going to keep all because it's really hard to read. Literally all it should be is all. So let's go ahead and go to our examine step. And the first question is, does the code work? So let's see. I've loaded into the game and I'm gonna queue up for this. And it did not put me in the suit right there, but it's possible that it put it in at the wrong place in the game loop. So I'm gonna see if it changes when we start the game. Okay, we're in the suit, guys, but it's definitely massive, and I think I know why. I'm pretty sure that when I made Volcano Dash originally, I'm sorry, that is so funny. When I made Volcano Dash originally, the Hytopia player model was a different size that we were scaling down. So my models were that same size. So, okay, so the suit comes on and off correctly though, but the cosmetics are not necessarily going on and off correctly, but we'll worry about that in a minute. Let's start with our suit size. Probably in our hazmat suit entity file, we're naming our pieces, we're doing the models. This is where it's being constructed. I'm pretty sure if right here I just add model scale and change it to half, I think it'll be correct. It's either half or it's 0.75. And also I'm going to go to my lava rising config just for now. And I'm going to change my queue time to 1 second so I don't have to wait. I'll have to change that back later, but... All right, so now when I queue... Okay, so that's the correct size now. But you can see that all of the other cosmetics aren't being hidden, so we need to work on how it's handling that. Okay, so does the code work? The answer right now is sort of, right? At least for the suit spawning part. Okay, so in the Hazmat Suit Manager, we've got all this stuff about cosmetic hide substrings and player entity set model hidden nodes. Okay, this is incorrect. This is not the way to hide cosmetics, because when we go to that thing, it's cosmetic hidden slots is what we want. So we're gonna go to the API really fast and look at how it's done. I don't know if what I'm trying to do is possible. I know we can set them when the player first joins the game, but I don't know if we can set them in general. Okay, so it's confirming that we can't like dynamically hide and unhide cosmetics right now. We'd have to hide them all at the beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and hide them all at the beginning for now. And then hopefully they'll add a way to hide and unhide them. And then I'll update the game when that's available. Okay, so I said, please hide all cosmetics during the entity creation, and then add a to-do next to that to update it when Hytopia updates the functionality. So we can't do this exactly like I want to do it right now, but I still want to be able to have this functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and hide all cosmetics for players in the game by default when they first join. All right, so they added that to the constructor. So if we go into the game manager, we can see during our player entity creation, we now have cosmetic hidden slots set to all. So now when a player joins the game, they have no cosmetics, it's just the player. And now when I join this, I get the suit. Still a little bit too small and stuff, but I can get the suit looking good in the polish step. All right, so that's done. So the next thing I need to check is if the actual damage system of the suit is working. It looks like I don't have any sort of UI elements for it. There doesn't seem to be anything happening that I can see visually, but that doesn't mean it's not coded. Okay, so the code sort of works. It's not accomplishing our goal yet, so we're gonna add to it now. So my prompt is, okay, let's talk about the suit health. I do not want any region functionality. We need an overlay UI element to display the suit health. Please create one. And I tell it where. Number 3, the lava rising config file is where we need to set the damage rate while colliding with the lava entity and the suit health starting point. Number 4, when a player's suit overheats, they should be evacuated out of the chamber by respawning them to a spawn point that we define in lava rising config. Their suit should despawn and their game state updated. Number 5, the player should get their suit as soon as they enter the queue. And number 6, when the game starts, the player should be teleported into the chamber. We need to set up coordinates for this in the lava rising config. So a bunch of little minor tweaks basically that should help the flow and the feedback the player is receiving. Okay, so now it's updating our config file, and it's added our chamber spawn points. It's added our hazmat suit health and our evacuation point. Now it's going to create a suit health overlay UI. So we go to overlay UI, we can see it here. We're going to need to add this into our build.js file. That it says step it hasn't done yet, so we might need to do that. It's removing this regen stuff that we didn't want. Okay, now it's messing up. Okay, so it was trying to add it to the index file directly, and I stopped it before it could make that mistake. All right, so it says it's done. One thing I know I'm gonna have to do is I need to rebuild this UI. So I'm gonna go grab that command. Where is that? Right here. I'm gonna grab that, run that to rebuild our UI. Okay, and it says the player flow is now they join the queue and get the suit, and they get the suit health UI to show up. The game starts, they teleport into the chamber. Number 3 is lava collision, take 15 damage per hit. The suit is depleted, evacuate to safety and cleanup. All right, so I've got my suit. And it definitely teleported me, but I can't check collisions because and there's the suit up there, the suit health. So I can't check it because it teleported me off the map. So I need to change that in the config file. Let's make sure these are like on the map. Okay, some of these are probably duplicates, but that's okay. All right, let's try again. All right, it teleported me into the chamber. Okay, so I've got my suit health in the top right. I'm going to collide. It's damaging it. Okay, it's not continually damaging it. Okay, so I said, okay, we are close. The suit needs to be damaged as long as you are colliding, not just on the first collision. I spelled collision wrong. Whoops. And it needs to be depleting at a constant rate. So not just 15 at a time, but like 15 per second, but draining down instead of updating every second. All right, so it says it's got it correct now. Let's see. Yeah, that looks better. Make sure it stops when I'm not touching it. Great. So I increased the damage rate in the config file, and now I'm going to restart it and make sure that it actually teleports us out. Okay, so even though I was teleported out, my energy is still going, so that's a problem. Everything still doesn't look good, so we're going to prompt again. I said, okay, great. Now when a player is evacuated, they should not continue to accumulate energy. All right, I'm going to increase the rate even more, so 50 per second. I fixed that, so let's make sure this works. Accumulating, evacuated, and we stay with 10. Great. So the only other thing I want to check is making sure there's nothing weird that happens when there's 2 players. So I'm going to put this back to 10 seconds to make sure I have time to queue up 2 players. Okay, so now I'm going to add a second player into the game. All right, so now I have 2 players side by side. Let me turn off the music. I'm going to queue the 1 player and then I'll queue the second player. So the 1 player's in the game. I'm going to have this player join the game. And I'm going to make sure that while 1 player's suit's getting damaged, the other one is fine. I guess we'll both teleport. Okay. All right, let's see. My suit's getting damaged. Theirs is fine. I'm out of the chamber. They're still in the chamber. Accumulating. Okay, I think everything looks good. So we're close to being right, but because this player was evacuated out early, it didn't save their score. So we had 40 energy, and you can see it's not showing up in this player's last energy. So I'm going to fix that now. So I said, okay, now when a player evacuates, we don't seem to be saving their score. Is that correct? It doesn't show up in their last energy section, for instance. Okay, so let's make sure now that this is working. I'm gonna queue up with this guy. Gonna wait for the mode to start. Okay, oh. Alright, so I'm gonna evacuate this guy out. This guy's energy was saved, so that's good. Everything looks good for this now. Everything's done. I don't really need to clean up any comments yet. I'm gonna do a bigger pass to clean up comments in the next phase because it's like my final step. So I'm just going to go ahead and commit these changes to GitHub. I'm going to save all and commit, sync changes. Okay, and that is the end of step 12. Okay, step 13 is final polish. I'm not going to actually use this step to do this because we're going to do this stuff in our polished video. What I am going to do though is I'm going to run through all the game modes and I'm going to make a list of the things that I still need to add, like little random stuff that I still need to code. So I'm going to run through all of the modes really fast and just test everything and make notes of small things that I might want to change. So the untime mode, the only thing I want to change here is I want to split out these different UIs into game mode specific ones. So I'm going to make a note for that. And then I want to clean up these messages. I don't want to show messages when the checkpoints are activated. So I'm going to mention that. Remove checkpoint messages from the chat. So that's it for that mode. I'm going to go into the timed mode now. Same thing, we're going to remove these things. I don't think anything else needs to be different about the time mode. And then from the lava rising mode, what I want for this is I definitely want an overlay when they're in the lava and a message when they evacuate. Oh, I also need a sound. I need a sound while colliding with lava entity. I don't think I have that right now. Oh, I need like a countdown. I think we can be done with the development plan. I'm just going to work through these few little notes that I have that I want to finish before we move on to making our map. Okay, so right now in our game HUD, we have different things set up for each of the game modes, all in the same file. We want to change this to have different overlays for the different game modes. Keep the game HUD file because we are going to use this file to display leaderboards and player stats later. Basically, I want to have one HUD that's always there, but then as you go into the different game modes, the different information for that game mode will appear, and then when you're done, it'll disappear. Okay, now our checkpoints are working. Make sure it resets, goes away. Start the timer mode, checkpoints working. Time is working. All right, that looks like that's good for that one. This is done. Remove the checkpoint messages from the chat. I can do this myself. I'm gonna go to the checkpoint system, I think. I'm gonna delete this message. I don't care about that. I'm gonna delete this message. All right, let's see if that takes away all of our messages. Okay, so there's still an activation message on the checkpoints. All right, so activation, checkpoint system, probably the checkpoint entity has a message also. Send message to player. Yeah, checkpoint activated. We do not need this message either. Great, no messages there. And this looks good. All right, so that's done. Those checkpoint messages are gone that we no longer wanted. We want an evacuation overlay. I'm gonna have it create 3 more overlays as part of this. An evacuation overlay that shows the suit failed, an in lava overlay that tints the whole screen like red, and a lava rising queue overlay that shows a countdown until the actual game mode starts. Okay, so it made all the files. Now I just needed to integrate it into our game manager. Okay, so it says it has updated all of this. Let's check it out. So I'm gonna press this. Okay, that's way too big and crazy, but I'll worry about that later. Okay, now when we go in here, yep, it tints the screen red as it should. Suit failed, evacuated from chamber. We'll polish all that stuff up later, but again, today we're just doing the functionality and everything functions well. Sounds while colliding with the lava entity. Okay, so I need a new sound for this. So I'm gonna do fire. Sure, why not? Fire ignite. I'm gonna call this lava entity collision. All right, so we're gonna have it make that for us. So now I'm gonna turn my sound on and test it. Great. Okay, and now the last thing that I want to do is I don't want to have these leaderboards as scene UIs like I originally set up. I think they're going to be too hard to manage, so I'm going to set these up as overlay UIs instead. Right now, the leaderboard system and energy leaderboard system have scene UIs, and I tagged those 2 files for the scene UIs. I want instead to have the leaderboards as an overlay UI. I'm going to say in the overlay UI folder. When I press V, I want the leaderboards to open, and when I press V again, I want the leaderboards to close. All right, let's see. Okay, so there's our leaderboard, so we can open and close it. Okay guys, I think we've done it. I think we have all of our core functionality complete. So it's obviously not much to look at right now, right? But we can start our untimed mode. We can go through checkpoints. We can hit lava to be put back at our checkpoints. We can finish the mode and get a trophy, which is a piece of bread right now, which will change later, obviously. We can start a timer mode, same thing. Checkpoints are counting in the corner. We can hit the lava, which puts us back to our last checkpoint. And then we can finish the mode. And then we have our lava rising mode, so we can queue up. Obviously, we'll change this overlay as well, but it's fine for now. You can see we got our suit on. And then we're going to be transported into the chamber. We can take damage by running into the lava. We can use the supercharge station. We can sit in an energy cluster to accumulate at a faster rate. We can get our energy shards by collecting them by running into them. And when the round ends, which should be in just a second here. We're transported back out of the chamber. And then if we press V, we can see our leaderboard. I obviously haven't edited this video yet, but I'm sure it's insanely long. So if you've watched this far, hopefully you've learned a lot. Hopefully this was helpful. Obviously, as you're working, a lot of these things are going to be very specific to what you're doing. So my only advice is when you get stuck, keep pushing through, change models, read the dev docs, and then if all else fails, jump on the Hytopia Discord, ask for help, and someone can help you get over the hump that you're at. Starting in the next video, things are gonna look a lot better because we are going to be building out our map. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the build.hytopia.com website to build out a really nice map, and then we'll integrate it into our game. We'll put our checkpoints in their proper locations, and then this is going to start looking a lot more like our finished piece. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck to you as you complete this step on your end. And if you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the comments, or like I said, jump into the Discord and someone will definitely help you out. If you find this content helpful, be sure to subscribe. And if you do, I will see you in the next one.